Let's do a close reading of Hymn to God, My God, in My Sickness by John Donne. John Donne was a Church of England Protestant priest in the 17th century in England, and perhaps the successor to Shakespeare for short verse, or perhaps George Herbert, his close coordinate was, or confederate, perhaps Robert Herrick, perhaps even Milton, more famous for his long verse, but considered the founder of an informal school, never organised, not like the Imagists or the Fugitives, called the Metaphysical Poets, which comes from, I think the reference comes from Dryden slamming Donne for speaking in metaphysics to women when he should be trying to seduce them. And I think it's that Samuel Johnson popularizes this in his biography of Abraham Cowley, another metaphysical poet, from memory. And yeah, Donne, a big thing about the metaphysicals was that you can frame it different ways. You can actually say, particular techniques, this is merely a pun functionally, but that they were bigger into metaphor than allegory. The metaphysicals were into metaphor rather than allegory. But perhaps the meaning originally, and it's something you can certainly see, and I talk about this a bit in my Substack this week, I'll link it in the comments, is that they use theological and philosophical concepts to talk about all kinds of things. Particularly, most famously, or infamously, this is the source of Dryden's insult in love poetry. You can find that in Donne's love poetry. You can find it in Andrew Marvell's fantastic, one of the great English poems, To His Coy Mistress. You can talk about those and be like, yeah, that's the kind of guy, the kind of thing they do is they'll use a metaphor of they often use a theological metaphor, of to do with we're descended from Abraham, thus and now this. They use something which is either a metaphor or a comparison or an analogy or a simile or whatever, and it, rather than saying my love is like a red, red rose, they use a biblical reference that is perhaps quite ornate as well, and we'll see some of this going on here. This is not a love poem. This is a theological poem. It is, one of the kind of associated with his divine holy poems. It is comes after, in order of most of your books, after the Holy Sonnets. There is another, I think, sickness poem. Basically, he's sick for a lot of the last 10 years of his life. And that's important context here, is that this is all quite sincere. This is from hard experience. I'll read it. Since I am coming to that holy room where with thy choir of saints for evermore I shall be made thy music. As I come, I tune the instrument here at the door, and what I must do then, think here before. Whilst my physicians by their love are grown cosmographers, and I their map, who lie flat on this bed, that by them may be shown that this is my southwest discovery, befratum fabris, by these straits to die, I joy that in these straits I see my west, for though their currents yield return to none, what shall my west hurt me? As west and east in all flat maps, and I am one are one, so death doth touch the resurrection. Is the Pacific Sea my home, or are the eastern riches? Is Jerusalem, Anion, and Magellan, and Gibraltar all straits, and none but straits are way to them, whether where Japhet dwelt, or Cham, or Shem? We think that paradise and Calvary, Christ's cross and Adam's tree stood in one place. Look, Lord, and find both Adams met in me. As the first Adam's sweat surrounds my face, may the last Adam's blood my soul embrace. So in his purple wrapped receive me, Lord, by these his thorns give me his other crown, and as to other souls I preach thy word, be this my text, my sermon to mine own, therefore that he may raise, the Lord throws down. Okay. Let's check our, great. Let's check our drawing tool. So he's dying, or thinks he's dying. He may not have actually died very close after this. This might be in his final illness, or this may be earlier, in his first great illness in the early 1620s. I think my video has just gone, but don't worry about that. You mostly need to look at this, which is still recording. So he's talking about that. He's talking to God. It is a hymn. He says it's a hymn. He's very clear about what kind of thing it is, and he addresses God immediately with, what I will be coming to that holy room where with thy choir of saints forevermore I shall be made thy music. There's an interesting comparison here. Music. You can look at the poetry of Les Murray, which I'm sure I'll get to one of these days. My favourite modern poet who died just 2019. But yes, who often uses poetry as an image for spiritual revelation, truth. God somehow may you somehow make our prose. May our prose somehow be made poetry, something like that. A very good poem. Somehow you can leave it all. Go and look it up. You find you can leave it all. That's it, in that poem. So since I'm coming to that holy room wherewith thy choir of saints forevermore shall be made thy music, you can see the verse pattern here is quintains, 5 lines, and simple stuff, rhyme wise, relatively. A B A B B, and that goes through. You have we've talked about this before. The issue of periodic pronunciation, come and room. Rhyme, apparently. West and East rhyme, apparently. R, Gibraltar, Calvary, me, Lord, word. And some of these are dubious rhymes, and some of them actually will make more sense in Donne's accent at the time. Whereas for us, they don't sound quite as true, but there's more of a rounding of O's, particularly. You'll find these false vowels often, false rhymes often come from an O. So we're talking about a 10-syllable line generally. Since I am coming to that holy room, where with thy choir of saints forevermore, I shall be made thy music as I come. We're being pointed back to the typical verse meter of the era, and the most famous thing, iambic pentameter, used most famously in sonnets and in blank verse, here used in quintains. But iambic, the idea there is there are 5 units of meter of rhythm, and they're made up of iambs, which are a kind of, let's say, a soft syllable, an unstressed syllable. Unstressed. The un is unstressed. The stress is stressed. And then a stress syllable, so unstressed, stressed. However, very often there'll be lots of variation in this, and one thing you'll find in some of the metaphysicals, really all of them, but Donne is the obvious example, not just because he's in front of us, but because he is an exemplar poet in lots of ways, to lots of that you can see as an influence going forward, but also explores a lot of these tricks. And the reason that you might have variation in meter, not just have just tum, ti-tum, is to avoid banality and a deadening of the ear. Tum, ti-tum, 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 tum, ti-tum, ti-tum is not particularly exciting to listen to, even though it is like human speech or English speech, common, just normally talking. But then there is variety in how we speak. And here, I actually think there's a really interesting question here about the best pronunciation here. Since is unstressed. I is stressed. Coming. Is it I am coming? Is it I am coming? There's a dramatic emphasis. Since I am coming. You could debate it, I think. Probably that's unstressed. Coming. Since I am coming. That's more like I ams, except here you've got pauses. A unit of meter can cross over between words, but it doesn't always. Partly because we naturally begin to pause at that word break. So here, since I am, this could just be. We could say since I is an I am. That's an easy way to think about it. But you could get to silly things like, is it an amphibrach? And by silly, I just mean as in, I'm probably giving more detail and thought into this than it needs. i.e. unstress, stress, unstress. You can see that the exact way he's using these, and the fact that you could, is this, in fact, a stress? Who knows? Since I'm going to that holy room. And there's a lot of things like that. There's lots of little kind of variations in rhythm. That's not like Marlowe and Shakespeare in really creating England's heroic line, which in blank verse form particularly, but also in sonnets and so on, for both of them, do relieve that repetitiousness and do give a lot of these tricks. These aren't novel to Donne, but I think if you want some kind of sign of, and I mean, I'm thinking, you can compare in some ways the relatively, and I would generally find a relatively simple pattern and meter in Clare, though Clare understands, in Snowdrop, though he understands tricks and meter. The fact there are often more tricks of meter in the metaphysical poets, and you're sometimes pulled towards a dramatic pronunciation that ends up certainly not being iambic pentameter. We're talking about it is decasyllabic, generally, with the small variations you'll occasionally find. And it often seems like pentameter, but there'll be little tricks. And that tells us something about this school, that they use these illustrations. And we see, ignore this first verse, which is perhaps, though it's not metaphoric to him, I should say, but seems to us highly metaphoric, but it's not really the kind of thing we're talking about, where we think that there's these physicians who are cosmographers, and here's a map who's flat on the bed, and there's mention of the Southwest Discovery and Straits, which is a pun, and a Latin motto, basically, which is to do with the breaking and grinding away of things. In these straits, I see my west, and he again goes back to the flat. I'm a flat map. Death doth touch resurrection. This seems to be a pun. The same here. Not that it's quite as often. It doesn't seem as funny a pun. It's not obviously not meant to be funny here. But again, a pun on the idea of Adam with the rhyme. Adam's sweat coming out of the garden is like Jesus' blood on the cross. They are each the great trial of their life in some sense. And the names of discoveries, the Magellan Strait, the Anion Strait, the Gibraltar Strait, and the biblical references, the three sons of Noah after the flood, the theological discussion of whether Eden was in Jerusalem, and they travel out east to Mesopotamia, and the idea that and again punning in the quite sober sense we're using here, of the two crowns, the crown of thorns and the crown of glory. Be this my text, reference a sermon text, a biblical text that he preached on, because Donne was a preacher. You can see he used these two sets of images and mixes and matches them and merges them. The idea of the spiritual life and the idea of the naval discoveries, the exploratory discoveries at sea of the age that were in some ways, the golden age of discovery may even have been said to have passed by 1620s, 1630s. By that, what I mean is that there's still, continuing thing about, like, can we get through on a northwest passage? They obviously had yet to explore the Antipodes, Australia and so on, and and hadn't got to the poles. But there's all these discoveries that really, in lots of ways, are touchstone for the age of exploration. Magellan's round the world trip, and the seeking of passages to get round to the Indies, which after all was what Columbus sailed for, was the idea that he was going to go to the Indies, to India. The reason we call those islands, the Caribbean islands, the West Indies, the reason the cricket team is called the West Indies is for that reason. Is because they were the Western Indies rather than the real Eastern Indies that we really wanted to find. So, yes, you see he's merging these two, and there are points of pun and lots of the idea of identity. The idea, this is the thing, the pun often being based on the idea of identity. West and East are one on flat maps, and that is like, he is a flat map because he's lying on his bed, death and the resurrection. all straits and numbered straits. Here we have the pun of the strait that is the naval strait, you sail through it, and dire straits, as in the band, Mark Knopfler, great struggles in life. All straits and number straits, all struggles and none but struggles. But of course, here we have a sweeter, more interesting image, because he can talk about he can use that pun on straits. So here's a funny thing I find about this, is that it seems so playful and so, from having intentionally murky meter to using quintanes, not unique to Donne, but not exactly the most famous verse format, and using all these complex references typical of the metaphysicals, including the Latin reference, but often playfully, not just using complex academic references, being big into Latin and Greek, and lots of words, the choice being, so the physicians by their love are grown. It doesn't say kind of world drawers. It says cosmographers, Greek cosmos, world, universe. Graphers, writers, drawers, cosmographers. They, the idea that they're so into his medical case that they have become world drawers, because we are a world. They are so fascinated with it, like people at the time were fascinated with drawing the world. These things almost seem witty and funny, and certainly they're very erudite, except this is a comparison, Donne or Marvell, I've already mentioned, or others, and not Herbert. Herbert is this, and Thomas Traherne, who was a metaphysical, who wasn't discovered really till the 20th century. His works were functionally lost. But Traherne as well are very sincere. But many of the others are often very playful, even if they have more religious texts. In that sense, I'd say Milton, who was not metaphysical, and in fact was theologically in a different kind of camp. He was a Puritan. He is much more sober and serious than most of the metaphysicals, not all of them, with a particular kind of different theological bases. Here, this is deadly serious, and I mean that almost literally. He's dying, or thinks he is. He is practicing, as I come to be made thy music to worship thee, with the angels who make music forevermore. And here that I shall be made thy music is a liquid metaphor, isn't it? Is half metaphor. I won't literally be music, but it's almost not a metaphor. There is a way, and think of Tolkien and the music of the Aina to do with this image of music. I should practice praising you and talking to you. I should ensure that I am up to date on my prayers. And he's joying, he's happy, but his sweat surrounds his face. He is wearing these his thorns. There's a comparison though. It's Jesus' suffering that earns the merit for Donne. It's still this image of suffering, which reminds us that he is suffering. And the image of exploration is not a kind of coy device, cheeky device to seduce a woman, but a very serious way of talking about the journey of life that eventually ends. And a poem, certainly no one would doubt, but which Doubt is Serious, which kind of may remind us of the same things in some ways, is Ulysses by Tennyson, and that idea that this old Ulysses in Ithaca gathers the last of his companions. Presumably some survived, but not in Homer's version. Indeed, they do in other versions. But he gathers his old companions from the war, but also others he's adventured with over life. And he says, look, we're just going to go. We're old, we're going to go and try to find the happy isles in, here's a relevant point, question, in the west, though you want to go east to go to Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem, what shall my west hurt be? He will also be aware, by the way, of that Happy Isles reference, that Avalon is in the west. You go west to the Happy Isles, with Achilles, whom once I knew. And then he says, though we are not the power that in former days moved heaven and earth, that which we are this this idea that a naval journey, this ocean journey into the West, Tolkien as well, think of that. That's the Happy Hours, of course. That boat journey into the West of discovery and death is a transmutation and dignification of Ulysses, of Odysseus in that poem. And so here, though it seems punning, it's very serious. And I think it's a very good example of the style because of, though in this case it's serious, where not all examples are emotionally serious, they may be simply amorously serious. We see here those tools of metaphor, of strong, vivid metaphor that is not dead, I think, now. Here's an interesting thing. One reason I think Eliot turns to the metaphysicals and helps revive their reputation is because their metaphors do not die on us. They're not flat. And this is a problem that he highlights, is that dead as a donkey, flogging a dead horse to dead metaphors, literally and figuratively. They are, if I say he's dead as a donkey, people know what I mean, but there's no poetic force in it because there's no surprise. It is banal. And if I use it and I put it in the mouth of a character and I'm otherwise capable and competent, probably what I'm doing is not necessarily saying that person is banal strictly, but I'm saying they're an ordinary person. They're using an ordinary mode of speech where poetry is this elevated mode. And here, what I think Eliot finds turning to the metaphysicals in part is untapped resource in the English language for talking about the how should I put it? Untapped resource to freshen the language, purify the dialect of the tribe. He says in Little Gidding, Eliot does, and these strong metaphors, vivid metaphors, are very good for. And I'd say also, if you want to have Latin and other languages in there, Eliot loves that stuff. You can see an inspiration here. It's also, I just think, quite emotionally powerful, and you don't have to, I think, share his belief, though you have to have a natural human sympathy for what other people believe. But this idea that he is suffering, but he has a quite powerful, in the poem, quite powerful spiritual sense and experience of the merit of Christ on the cross, who's going to give a crown of glory, that in some way, not in terms of earning that merit, but the sweat around his face is in a sense almost, he is like the first Adam dying, but in his suffering that kind of connects him to Jesus who suffered. I just think it's quite touching. It's a sincere spiritual experience of a man. You can't think of Larkin in Obeyed saying, don't tell me I'm not going to die. That's the thing I'm scared of. Like it doesn't make me happy to think that at the end of a materialist existence we're just nothing. Here we can disagree with Donne, but I think it's something which, in a situation he can't escape from. He can't escape from mortality and death, and he can't escape from his current illness. He may recover, but he cannot personally just kick it off. He is coping with it via transmuting his mind to poetry. So yeah, I really like this poem. As I say, it's my favourite. I don't know if I did say actually, but it is my favourite poem of Donne's, I think. And I recommend reading Donne. I recommend reading Herbert. I think Herbert, on the spiritual side, possibly the best metaphysical love poem is probably To My Coy Mistress by Andrew Marvell. But yeah, also Abraham Cowley, Henry Vaughan, Thomas Traherne. I feel like I'm missing someone, one of the original six. But yes, anyway, tell me your thoughts in the comments, and I will see you next time.